The Girl in the Blue Sweater by Black Friday's Witch, 13. I heard the thud as my head hit a log, causing me momentarily dizziness. I was walking alone in the woods again. It wasn't my finest hour, but I had felt like someone was following me. I began to run fast as I could, but my own clumsiness caught up with me in that moment. I was wearing my stupid school uniform with the classic white shirt, blue and green skirt, white socks, black shoes. I had my book bag over my shoulder, and I was casually moving through the woods of the park by my house when I tripped over my own feet. The woods were part of a national park that I lived by, and I was taking one of the shorter trails that led to an opening that would lead to a clearing just behind my backyard. It was a path my mother had warned me about numerous times because it was so isolated, with fall arriving, the darkness of twilight that accompanied that time of year. So here I was, casually walking, just taking my time admiring the leaves as they fell from the trees onto the narrow path that met the tall grasses encompassing it. The birds were singing their late afternoon songs, and I noticed a little red fox at the end of the trail. I stopped as I saw it cross the road 30 feet from my secret trail. It was a very quiet street, isolated and smooth, of new asphalt, and I saw a red pickup truck slow down as it passed me. In the summer, the point of which I stood was not visible, but in the fall, the trees had lost their leaves, creating an easy visual for anyone driving down that road. I had heard stories of a red pickup truck from my friends at school. I chalked it up to being just another creepypasta or a local urban legend. If you saw the red pickup truck, he kidnapped our girls, all of them, ages 16 or so, and murdered them. I saw the pickup truck stop and pull off to the side of the road. Even in this moment, I did not think much of it, and when I saw him reach for a large rope in the back and head in my general direction, I just assumed he was a nature hiker or he worked for the park. Again, I was not thinking of the stories that I had heard. I slowly walked in the direction of where I was headed when I saw him running towards me. He was coming straight for me, and I began to run as fast as I could. Hands shaking, I could just barely feel my legs. I felt like I was floating or gliding along that narrow path. Then, as he was gaining up on me, I stopped suddenly in my tracks. At the end of the trail was a girl in a uniform like mine, hair about my color that mostly covered her face, and she wore a blue sweater. I don't know why, but when I noticed her, it caused me to stop in my tracks, even as I could hear him coming up behind me. I turned to look behind me, and in an instant both he and the red pickup truck were gone. I went to move as my adrenaline was still at its highest, and she too was now gone. I was confused, but there was no way I was sticking around to find out what was going on. When I reached my house, I went straight for my room and sat on my bed. I was exhausted at this point. I was still reeling from what had happened and lay down on my bed, closing my eyes. I'm not sure how much time lapsed, but when I opened my eyes, I was still quiet, and there was no sign of my parents. I thought nothing of it as I stood up and looking at the sky from my window. It sure was a close one, I thought to myself. I sat staring up at the sky. The moon was a giant white orb, and everything seemed so peaceful in that moment. Then the reflection of my bedroom window. I saw her. The girl in the blue sweater was standing behind me. She hid her face with her long dark hair, and I stopped breathing. How did she get into my house? I turned quickly to look at her, but she was not there. My brain must be playing tricks on me. I went to my bed, laying down and closing my eyes. When I awoke, it was daytime, and I looked over at my clock. It was after 7 a.m., and so I got up and readied myself for school. The morning walk to school seemed bizarre and slow-paced, almost as though I were moving in slow motion. The neighborhood street was isolated and a desert of sidewalks and Cape Cod homes. The morning air was cool, and no cars were driving along the busier street near the intersection of my school. I thought a lot about my encounter the day before. That is when I saw the red pickup truck again. This time the truck was driving slowly up a street, 2 over from mine. I noticed her then. The girl was laughing and texting on her phone. The red pickup truck stopped in front of her just as she was about to cross the street. It blocked her pathway, and so she had no choice but to look up from her phone and stop. The man driving it said something, and she leaned into the passenger window. Within seconds, the girl stared in terror as he quickly moved from the vehicle and pushed her inside the truck, accelerating at a pace that was quickly gone. I stood horrified, and as I went to move, I saw her there. The girl in the blue sweater was standing at the corner, that face covered again with her brown hair, the color of chestnuts. I ran towards her, but she turned from me, and I tried to tap her on the shoulder, but she was now gone. And as I was standing in the bathroom at school, suddenly, listening to my friends Jane and Aubrey. How did I get here? They were talking about the guy in social studies class they thought was cute. I tapped Jane on the shoulder to get her attention so I could tell her about the girl that was kidnapped. Someone had to help her. I tapped on her shoulder, but she ignored me like I wasn't even there. I heard the alarm clock again, and I found myself in my own bed. I blinked hard, looking over at my alarm clock. It must have been one strange dream. I got up again, preparing myself for school. I could hear my parents in the kitchen, and then within seconds they were both gone. I had been sitting, staring at my closet, listening to them. I was in a world of confusion. That dream was so real, and it felt so real. I left my room and walked down the long hallway to the front door. When I opened the door, I found myself back in those woods. I could see the man from the pickup truck. He was behind someone, and I looked away in shock and horror. He was attacking her. He was on top of her, and he appeared to be hurting her somehow. I screamed at him to stop. I turned to walk away, and as I did, he saw me. His pants were unbuckled, and then he ran toward me. I got a good look at him this time. He had reddish blonde hair, a tan flannel jacket, rugged jeans, and a red ball cap. His face was reddened from the elements, and I could tell he must be some sort of hunter or woodsman. I ran and tripped and fell, and as I did, I found myself turning back towards the area where he just was standing. He was gone, but that same girl with the blue sweater. Her blue sweater. She was just sitting there. She was holding her sweater close, and her head was bloody. I looked at her, and she faded before my eyes like a ghost. I got up now, running toward my school, and when I got there, I opened the door. "Miss Hanson, you're late," said the vice principal. "I'm sorry, I just saw someone hurt in the woods." She stared at me and said nothing. She shook her head and then walked away down the hall. I straightened my skirt and my socks, and I walked towards my morning class. I saw Jane sitting there twirling her hair and sneaking a text to someone. I sat down and then tapped Jane on the shoulder to ask her if I could borrow a pencil. Jane! Jane! Finally, she turned around. "Hey, why are you here?" she asked me. I go to school here?" She turned from me and then looked up at Aubrey. "I heard she was taken and they found her body by the old lake," she was saying. "I know. Stabbed, assaulted, choked to death," she was saying. Who? Who was stabbed? They didn't respond, but my teacher, Mrs. Fenton, stood up then. I just wanted to let everyone know that they found Kayla Fairfax this very morning, dead. Please join me in a prayer, she said, choking back tears. The entire class sat and looked very mournful then. You could hear a pin drop, it was so quiet. After class, I followed Aubrey and Jane down the hall and tried to keep up with them. They didn't seem to even care that I was there. It was highly unusual for them to treat me this way. I thought maybe they were just mad that I was late to school and I didn't walk with them. We always met by the bleachers and smoked, and it was my turn to bring the cigarettes. I figured they would be over it by the time tomorrow came around, and I just kind of shrugged it off. As I walked home, something told me to avoid the wooded trail I usually took. I took the main street toward my house, and as I was approaching my house, I saw that red truck again. This time he was approaching an older girl named Tracy. She hesitated, but the guy in the truck seemed to be convincing her to come toward him. She flipped her long bleached blonde hair over her shoulder and then walked toward him. She smiled, and he smiled at her, seemingly flirting with him as if she knew him. Up close, he didn't look that old at all. Maybe 27 or 28 at the most. She walked willingly towards the passenger side door and got in. I shook my head and tried to scream, but my screams were washed out by the sound of the loud motor of his red pickup truck. I looked down the road in horror, knowing what fate would await Tracy. I looked away from the direction that they were driving and then down at my feet. Somehow my shoes were muddy and covered in dirt. My white socks were pulled down and my knees were black and blue. How on earth did I get this dirty from walking home? I stood thinking I was going crazy when I saw her again. The damned girl with the blue sweater on. I yelled for her to come closer so I could ask her why she keeps showing up. Was she a fucking ghost? Was she an accomplice of this man? Why did she always keep her face covered, like she was hiding something? What the hell was going on? I stood there for a long while, just staring into nothing, and before I knew it, the streetlights were coming on and the sky was this dark blue haze of rain clouds. I didn't see the girl any longer. She had vanished into thin air again. I walked home slowly, and I felt so tired. I wasn't even hungry. I just went straight toward my room, said nothing to my parents, who were seriously engrossed into the television. The news was on, and the news anchor was talking about some sort of girl that had gone missing. Tracy Ellis of Boston Heights has been missing since March 23rd of this past year. She was last seen leaving school with friends when she never came home. Today marks the 3-month anniversary, but now with her body having been found in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park just this very day, an investigation can now be underway as to how she became to be there. So far, there are no suspects. I looked at my parents, and then hesitated as I got ready to tell them about my experiences when I heard my mom start to cry. It's the guy. I know it. You don't know that, Mary, said my dad, rubbing my mom's arm. He's the same man who attacked Helen. Suddenly, I felt numb because I was Helen. As I thought this, I was back in those woods again. There was the truck, and this time it had run over the little fox. I had stood on the road looking down at the fox, feeling sorry for it, when a man got out of the truck. I wasn't scared. He had a nice smile and pretty green eyes. I mean, he wasn't exactly handsome, but he was young, only no older than I, maybe in his early 20s. Fox? Man, I feel awful, he said, seemingly concerned. Yeah, they often run into the road. I didn't even see him till it was too late. Yeah, stuff like that happens in the park all the time, I said, looking up at him now, finally noticing he had not taken his eyes off of me. I shrugged and began to walk away. I looked back one last time and could see the red pickup truck, and for whatever reason, I looked at the license plate. It read HNDDOG, as in hound dog. I thought it was kind of funny, but didn't think much of it. "Well, I guess I'll be on my way," he said, heading back to his truck. I nodded and picked up my pace because my mother would be waiting on me. I continued into the woods, realizing I had been responsible. I forgot the cigarettes. I was responsible for getting them. I had an older friend that worked at the corner store by my house that sold them to me even though I was only 15, almost 16. I had changed direction, walking towards the center of the woods. About a quarter of a mile, I would come to a main road with a convenience store where my friend worked. It was getting darker, and I had heard it. Footsteps. I turned around and the man from the road was running towards me. Before I knew it, he had grabbed me and knocked me into a large tree that had fallen over. He pushed me over the log and then he held me down. I screamed, and before I knew it, he was pushing my face into the log as he shifted himself to get a better grip on my lower half. I heard him unzip his pants. At that moment, I knocked him back with my head like I had seen in all these movies. But then he ran up towards me and hit me in the head, nearly bashing my skull. The pain was so severe I blacked out. I could hear a beeping that sounded far off. The world was black. Then I began to open my eyes. The brightness of the room I was in was overwhelming. I heard my mother then. Steve, she's awake. Helen is awake." There was a loud commotion and a nurse came in and checked my vital signs. I was laying in the hospital bed and they began to ask me questions. Did I know where I was? Did I know my name? What was my date of birth? What was my mom's name? When the confusion ended, I noticed I had balloons, cards, and flowers all over my hospital room. I was still trying to comprehend everything. "Helen, do you know what happened?" asked my mom. "I'm not sure. Was I attacked?" "Yes, baby, you were." My mom started to cry, and as I remember the man's intentions to assault me, I began to tear up. "Was I..." She looked at me and then nodded, tears streaming down her face. "You've been in a coma for 3 months." I felt so disconnected. I had to explain my weird... That explained it. Just then, a man and a woman came into the room. "Helen, this is Detective Barnes and his partner Betsy. They're here to see if you can recall anything so that we can find this guy. There are other girls." That's when it hit me. I had seen the other girls while I was in my state. I looked up at my mom. "Kayla Fairfax and Tracy Ellis?" I asked. The detectives looked at each other and my mom stood up and walked over to my bed. "Yes, but how did you know?" She was so puzzled. "I saw them get taken." "He took them. He drives a red truck with hound dog on the license plate." "I saw them," I said, sitting up in my bed in a panic. They were all stunned, and to this day my mother thinks that I must have heard the television or the nurses taking care of me while I was out in a coma. They did locate the guy. He was arrested and sent to prison to serve 5 life sentences. Before me, there were 3 other girls he had murdered. They say victims of trauma dissociate from themselves or feel a sense of floating. I believe I left my body while I laid in that coma. I could see everything around me. I heard my parents and my friends, and for me, it explained how I got so many places just thinking about them. I know no one will ever believe me, but I saw them all while I was unconscious. I can't explain it, but it's my truth. I had a photo sitting next to my hospital bed of me and my two best friends. We all had our uniforms on and headed to a field trip the day it was taken. In the photo, I had on a blue sweater.